So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Bible study. We are continuing to study St. Paul. We're still working on his conversion experience. 3 times it's mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. The first time was in chapter 9. The second time is chapter 22. All right, and we are in chapter 22. And before we do that, anything on today's scripture, anything on today's sermon?
Yes, Father dear, I couldn't wait to tell you. You had me spellbound.
Uh-huh.
Well, what can I say?
Why
The
was
words,
that?
because you dug so deep. Before you started the sermon, something came in my mind, and I said, blind. I think blind means you know something, and you're given a definite heart to it, or definite mind or something. You know it's there, but you don't care. That kept reverberating in my mind.
Okay.
And then I heard you knocking the hammer on the right nail. It was more than I thought, but it wasn't a thought wasted. And Father dear, as usual, you are the professor. You're still the professor. You have not given it up. But God bless you. We need to know all that you have said. And all I'm hearing next to me, somebody said, tears came to my eyes. I said, let it flow. Let it flow. And then there was another lady on my left. She said, you ever hear anything like this? I said, no, not quite. But leave the professor alone, let him move on. It was a beautifully done sermon.
Okay, thank you.
Father Daly, I second that. I third it. I fourth it. I fifth it. It was fantastic.
Okay.
It was really, pun intended, eye-opening. It really was.
Oh boy.
It was very, very good, and it shows us that the saying, there is none so blind as he who will not see.
Right.
Exactly. Those of us who do not open up not only the physical eyes but the spiritual eyes, actually open your eyes and see things. It was amazing. I just sat there spellbound. It was amazing.
Okay.
You need to sit where I sit and where I walk up and down. I really do the reaction of the congregation. I pretty much was able to watch most people, not everybody in that church today. And they were so deep in concentration. It means that the message is being delivered and accepted.
Well taken. Well taken.
Okay.
Great.
Did it provoke any questions or thoughts or ideas or reflections from any of you?
Father dear, let me say, if you allow me to, that the reflections I have seen and will hold dearest to me was, like Miss Cody said, looking at the congregation, you could have heard a pin fall. And so it deemed necessary to say that the people took it. They took it with heart. Heart and hands and mind. And if they don't have to jump up and scream and yell to take something to heart.
Yeah.
They can sit, they can study it, and they can think about it in such a modest and quiet way. Okay. All eyes were fixed on you. And if I may, I saw when you speak, when it really hits you to the core, you raise your voice a little bit. I like when you do it, because I know you're feeling what we are feeling just the same. When that voice is raised, I say, there he goes, he's into it. And that's the Spirit of God. That's exactly the Spirit of God speaking to you, and you in turn pass it down to us.
I
The
was
scriptures
trying.
must be fulfilled.
We are beginning to hear, see, and feel
That's right.
what most of us never had where we came from.
That's right.
So a lot was held away from us. Now we're inhaling, and we are currently learning. We're trying to tolerate, and we are really seriously trying to move on in our spiritual lives.
All right. Good.
I was
I like
trying
that.
to, so every Sunday, I sometimes I write things down and sometimes I forget to do it. And I keep thinking that I need to write it down, that, right away, whatever I'm thinking, it's on paper. But just thinking about it now, I think you had said, and what stood out, I think, too, is the love that you have for yourself. And when you look at the next person next to you, and how can you not love someone, or you
Love,
love
right.
someone, then
That's
you
right.
love God.
Yeah.
I think that trying to bring back what I heard today, I think
Okay.
that stood out.
Good.
you
Good.
know.
Okay.
Yeah. And I have to remember that, because sometimes I know like at a funeral, and I sit and I watch everybody, and so people are different, how people are so different. But you, as you say, face to face with each other, you have to learn to accept who people are
Right.
and
Yeah.
where they are
Yeah.
in order to love. Yeah.
See, I just think, imagine if the Christian churches, and obviously we know there are so many denominations. So imagine if we, the Christian churches, all of us, were practicing this. The world would actually be different. I mean, Jesus knew what he was talking about. He didn't just, come up with this little fluffy idea. It was about transformation. And that's what the kingdom of God is. It's a world transformed, right? But people, not necessarily you and me, but people who taught us, got us caught into the idea of the everlasting kingdom, what's on the other side of death. And that's fine, because that's just as true, but they forgot to connect it. See, and what eternal life will look like, we're not exactly sure that, and we are proclaiming that there is eternal life, but we're saying it starts here. So if we don't begin to live the kingdom here, what do we think we're going to live on the other side?
All right. I hear
Because
that.
we're going to be sitting next to, and I always use this example, the people that we dislike the most are the ones we're going to sit next to there. We're going to be at the same table. And so what are we going to do with them?
And
For
we
all
have a
eternity?
chance. We have a chance to do it, because we have not just one whole church. We have all these different ministries
Yes.
that we are part of.
Yeah.
And we have to start from there, or even before, but we get the chance to do it in our different ministries. How do we treat others? How do we love others?
Yep.
To treat you. Great.
Okay, that's good. All right. If there's nothing else, we could begin to move on. We're in verse 17 of
Brother
chapter
Joe,
22. Go ahead, Miss Myrna. Yeah.
You talk about the different ways of being blind. Ignorance was one.
Yep. I
blind
named
at
that one.
heart.
Mm-hmm.
And, not seeing the things in our lives and different things like that.
Yeah. Yes, there's so
And
many
I think
things.
that's important.
Mm-hmm. See, fear can blind us. Surely anger, aggravation, anxiety. I mean, the list is probably eternal itself, because there are so many things, and with so many different personalities, we can use anything to blind us. The other side of this, go ahead. Somebody was going to say something?
No, I was also going to say that if blind man didn't see,
Mm-hmm.
but he was able to see Christ.
Yeah, yeah. And the religious men could see physically, but they
Right, but
surely couldn't see Christ. Yeah.
exactly.
See, then the other thing is, and I didn't touch on this. It was something I had thought about. It's in my notes and all, but it didn't come up. So it wasn't the important part that I was supposed to share today. The other thing is phoniness. You know how today you can meet somebody who pretends to be a beggar, pretends to, to have some disability, and they're there just, being a beggar, and we usually get frustrated and angry with them. But they did that in the past too. This is not like new, right? So that's why the Pharisees interviewed the parents. Is that your son? Was he blind from birth? Because there were a lot of people who played a game. They played.
I don't want to interrupt you, but that happened 2 years ago in Manhattan.
No,
it was on Channel 7.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's a thing that always happens, I even lived with a man once, Stephen, who I've talked about a number of times, who I had invited to live in the rectory with me. But Steve told me when he was a young man, that's how he'd get money for drugs. They'd find these different ministers who would say, okay, you're crippled now. And so he'd have crutches and he'd walk into a place and the minister would say, you're healed. And he'd throw the crutches and he'd run out of the room and he'd get his little pay. So Steve did that. And then there was a young man who was a seminarian, and he was working at the Marriott, over on Adams Street there. And he was working there as the doorman. And he said this big time healer was doing one of his services, in the big room up on that second floor. And he said, this lady comes out. The minister had just healed her and she was blind. And he goes and he says, oh my God. And again, he was a young seminarian. He's all excited. She's healed. And she said, young man, I can't see a thing. Get me a cab. So people pretend, ministers pretend. And so that's what could have happened in Jesus's day. And so the ministers of those days, the Pharisees, are wanting to make sure that he was really blind. Was Jesus a farce? Was he putting on a show? All right. And so all of those things being checked out, we know the story of a man born blind who Jesus heals. So that was just kind of a little added thing, but I I didn't throw it into today's sermon. Verse 17, after I had returned to Jerusalem, and while I was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord saying to me, hurry, leave Jerusalem at once, because they will not accept your testimony about me. Okay, so here's a trance. Here he's having a deep experience. Now, whatever you think of trance and I think of trance, what he's saying is he's having an experience of God. It could have been just plain old thoughts, right? Sometimes we make that person look like they're staring into space or something. Maybe. I mean, we don't have to go through all that drama. Because you and I have had experiences where we know God has been speaking to us, and it wasn't exactly all that drama. It was, we got it. We said, oh my goodness, what the heck have I been doing? And with that awakening, or the light goes on, or however we want to talk about it, we know God spoke to us. Okay? That's what happens to me, sitting in the temple, and he's in prayer, and what happens? The Lord Jesus comes to him again and says, get out of here. they don't believe you. All right. So I replied to the Lord, they themselves know that from synagogue to synagogue, I used to imprison and beat those who believed in you. And when the blood of your witness Stephen was being shed, I myself stood by, giving my approval and keeping guard over the cloaks of his murderers. Then he said to me, Go, I shall send you far away to the Gentiles. Okay, this could actually have happened, or just so you know both sides, it could have actually happened while he's in prayer. He gets this message from the Lord, or it could be how Luke is describing someone who persecuted the Jews, who was not trusted by the Jews, and being not trusted by the Jews, he goes off to preach to the Gentiles. Luke could be giving us the reason for how it happened. That's why we don't take everything literally, or this is the only way it was. It could really be Luke explaining, how in a religious way or a spiritual way, how Paul moved from being a missioner to the Jews to now being called to be a missioner to the Gentiles. Does that make some sense? Anyone?
Yes, it does. It does.
All right. So it could be either way, right? It doesn't have to be like this is what exactly happened. Remember, the Bible's written backwards. So it's only after Paul has already been preaching to the Gentiles that Luke's writing this. It's not like that Paul said, this morning, hey, I think this afternoon I'm going to start preaching to the Gentiles. And then Luke says, oh, let me put that down. All right. It didn't happen that way. It happened years later when Acts is being written, that Luke puts down this story, shares this story. Okay.
Are we saying Luke was doing more dissertation than anything else in his writings?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah. Especially
I always felt
Luke.
that way, but kind of was concerned that people would think that one flew over the cuckoos.
No, no, but especially in the Acts of the Apostles, because all of the things had happened, and so he's telling the story, but he has to tell the story in such a way that it makes sense and is believable. Even like this happened to me once. I was on retreat at a monastery where I went for almost 10 years. And it's in Big Sur, California. All right. So when I was the pastor over at St. Anne's, every year I went to this monastery that was a hermitage. And so the monks all had their own little kind of cottages. One year when I arrived, they said, well, we have no room in the guest house. You could come inside the enclosure. And so I had my own little, cottage. And we got together for prayer, 3 times a day, and the Eucharist every day. So they said, because you're on the inside on the enclosure, you could walk the rest of the mountain, and just be careful because there were wild boars and mountain lions and all those kind of creatures. They said, so just be careful, and but you're free to walk wherever you want to walk inside here. So one day I'm walking, and I made a left turn. I'll never forget the experience. I made a left turn, and there was a gigantic azalea bush. And azalea bush is kind of that pinkish red kind of flowers, but it was gigantic. And when I looked at it, I was so startled, like that it took my breath away. And I said, I wonder if Moses had an experience like this. Here is this big bush, but it looks like it's on fire. And it captured me. And it made me understand the experience that Moses may have had when he sees a bush that's on fire but not being consumed. Those things are possible. But in trying to tell the story, it sounds a little more Hollywoodish, right? He takes off his sandals and all of that. But but he's trying to convey to you and me who were not there how God touched him in such a profound way through a physical experience, through something he was seeing and something that he could behold with his whole being, right? It didn't say he went over and touched the fire, that's for sure, all right? He only saw the fire, right? And so it could have been a azalea bush. I mean, it could be anything, but just seeing, for me, seeing that bush helped me to understand how the Bible is written, because the writers are trying to convey a profound mystical experience that's filled with mystery of a God who transcends space and time and touches us in this world, right? And that's really what happened to Moses. And that's what Luke is talking about here, right? You know, and you and I could say, at least I used to say this when I was younger, like, why hasn't God ever talked to me? You know, like he's always talking to these folks. And again, I remember I was a pastor, and I'd always have people in my congregation who would say, "Oh, God told me," and usually it was something that I was against. God told me we should do this, and I'd say, "Well, tell him to talk to me. I'm the pastor." All right. So the reality is, we try to express how God is speaking to our hearts, right? And we can do that in so many beautiful ways. And the Bible is filled with them. Unfortunately, in our growing up, you know, they didn't exactly tell us the difference, right? And remember, when you and I first heard all of these stories, we were kids. And what do we know about being a child, right? We know that being a child, up until maybe 5 or 6, we kind of have what's called magical thinking. Well, we could easily have magical thinking about God, right? That it fits perfectly into it all. You know, God is part of the imagination when you're a child. And so we get stuck in those stories because we learned them when we were young, and nobody told us that those stories may have represented something else, that they were metaphor. And so we go through life thinking, well, this actually happened. On, Tuesday of that week, Moses walked up into that hill, and there he was, taking care of the sheep. And lo and behold, what does he see? A bush that's on fire but was not consumed. Maybe not. Maybe it's bigger than that. Or here, Paul went over to temple one day, and he keeps hearing voices, right? Maybe not. Maybe it's more like what you and I experience. We have an experience. We all literally have experiences, but maybe it's not as magical as the way we might conceive it, right? So as a child reading through the Bible, it was wonderful, right? It was God was always talking, and God sometimes spoke through thunder, and Jesus is walking on water, and he's stopping the wind, and oh my God, this is spectacular. All right, and then you have Moses with this fire, and then God is writing on stone, right? And of course, we've all seen the movies, and some of them do it in really interesting ways. It's almost like your God had a special stylus or something, with fire coming out of it, and made the 10 Commandments on these big stones, and that's pretty profound and exciting, especially when you're a child. But did it happen actually that way? Yeah, maybe not. All right. Um, but did God give commandments? Did God awaken in Moses something about these commandments? I believe so. But I also know that those commandments were part of the Code of Hammurabi. So they kind of were around already. And Moses being brought up by Pharaoh in the Pharaoh's home, right? Because you remember the daughter had adopted him. Growing up there, he would have had an education. He would have learned the Code of Hammurabi. And maybe those commandments really summarize the Code of Hammurabi. But you would notice this is what's different. The first few commandments talk specifically about God. Don't have other gods. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain and worship the Lord God. But then all the other commandments have to do with living civil life. They come from the Code of Hammurabi. So Moses, being an educated man, brings it all together and offers it to his people. Did it not come from God? Absolutely came from God. As everything has to come from God, because God himself is existence. If it exists, then God's there. All right? But again, they didn't exactly explain it the way I just said it, right? And what I am trying to do for us is make this book a living testament to the God we believe in. It's not only a bunch of nice stories, and especially it's not only a bunch of nice stories for children. This is a living document that says how human persons have encountered God, the same God that you and I encounter. So I don't want it to be so out there that we think we are not encountering God, right? Or that we had to live in those days in order to have God speak to our hearts. God is still speaking loud and clear today. And again, if we heard voices, I'm not so sure that that's exactly what they're talking about. All right. But I know that God speaks, right? And everybody on here, you wouldn't be on here this Sunday afternoon if you didn't know that God speaks. Any questions, thoughts, or ideas before we go to verse 22?
Most
You
of
know,
the
that,
time,
Totally
most
talks
of the
about it.
time we
Oh
only
my goodness.
understand, we only recognize it's God's voice after.
That's right. Very good. That Miss Myrna, that is on key. That's why we keep trying to say to everyone at the end of your day, reflect, because you'd never know it until after you've experienced it.
right.
You hold on to that thought for a second, because isn't that exactly how they wrote the Bible? What I've been saying all along. It's only after the experience, after you've witnessed to it, you've had to have the experience, then you would know, oh, that was from God. Or you would have this other experience too. You know it's from the other God, right? So it's what you can unleash from your own heart, what you've heard from your own ears, what you've experienced. Now, in reflection, that's why reflection is so important. That's why if you think of our society, it's really bad on reflection, but it's an essential part of being a human person. It is what makes us different than the other creatures on this earth. It's why in the morning praise statement, we go through this whole thing about consciousness and Adam and Eve, or Adam and Eve and Lucy, whatever words we use. We're talking about consciousness, the ability to reflect. So we only know God's speaking to us after we've heard God speak to us.
That's true.
Okay.
I had an
Now, sorry,
experience today,
three
Father.
people talking at the same time. Miss Curtis, go ahead.
I had an experience today.
Hmm.
I know God spoke to me because I was happy as a lark when I heard something that I felt over the years should have happened. And then God spoke to me and said, do you realize how many people may have died? Do you realize how many aircrafts blown up? And I said, oh my God, I'm not in the right shape here. I got to straighten up. I'm a Christian.
Okay.
I was basically celebrating something that should have happened a long time ago.
Okay.
And then God spoke to me and said, now listen up. You just came out of church. You better notice that a lot of people have died. And a lot of things are going to happen that's very bad. So forget about the part that makes you happy.
Yeah, that's God speaking. That's clear. Yeah.
Father dear,
Yeah, go ahead.
another way is that sometimes you yourself, you do not come to that realization. But when you
Mm.
share your experience with someone, they say, you know what? That was God's doing. That was
Yes.
God speaking to you. And then is when, you have that awakening or enlightenment and you
Yes.
said, oh, that is true. That
Yeah.
was from God.
That's very good. Thank you for sharing that, because that's why we're on this journey together. We need one another. I gave this example to someone. I can't even remember who it was now. At the end of the 10:30 service last week, and I said to her, um, in the 30-day silent retreat, you're supposed to come to the awareness of the resurrection. And I was, I don't know, 25, 24, when I was on that retreat. It was 30 days of silence. During that 30 days of silence, you had two, I don't know, they call them break days. It really literally meant you had 4 hours twice in 30 days where you could talk to the other people on the retreat. All right. So each time. And I remember saying at the first break day, I am so depressed. I mean, if I end the retreat like this, I am going to be so down. I can't imagine how life goes on at this point. I was just so wiped out by the experience. And so we get to the second one, and I remember saying to the guys again, this is really terrible. I'm not having any kind of light or peace. It's just one awful thing after another that I keep confronting in my heart. And you know, guys had said, well, their spiritual director gave them the readings for the resurrection, and they had, wow, great awareness. And there I was, no more aware than I was before we even started the retreat. And it was like the second or third day before the end of the retreat. So maybe 3 days before the end of the retreat. And so I come down to see my spiritual director, who I felt was torturing me. She would give me passages of scripture every day. And you had 4 passages, and you would spend an hour with each passage every day. So Sister Alice gave me, my passages. And she said, yeah, so what's going on? And I just, said, well, yeah, it's all kind of bleak and all. She said, okay. And so I go to the next day, and she said to me, the very first thing she said to me was, did you have any dreams? And I said, I don't think so. And then I said, oh, yeah, I did. And the dream, I remember this dream very, very clearly, because for me, it was the key. I said, in the dream, my father had died, many years before. And I said, in the dream, I meet my father in a subway. But instead of coming down the steps like I did, my father came out of the brick, the subway brick. He just like walked out of the brick. And I said to him, what are you doing here? How did you walk through the wall? And I just kept asking him those questions. And then we walked up the steps together, and he got into a car and drove away. It's like, okay. So Alice said, Joe, did you have any dreams? And I told her that. And as I said it, I said, he's the symbol of the resurrection for me. And I was saying exactly what the disciples were saying. How did you get in here? Why are you here? You're not supposed to be alive. And I, of course, for me, that was the break in the retreat. I mean, it was the most overwhelming experience of the resurrection. And so that's why I always spend a lot of time each year. We do the Ignatian Adventure, because it works. If you do it, it really does work. So to pick up the symbols, to be able to reflect, and to have, as Angela said, someone ask you, someone point out, because you might not see it yourself. I didn't see it myself. I remember that dream when I woke up and I said, well, what a crazy dream that was, and didn't think of it again. And so I sat in, at 10 o'clock for our session. And yeah, now all of a sudden that dream meant everything to me. It put together the whole 30 days of retreat in silence. It made the most sense of how God keeps appearing to us, how the resurrection takes place even today. That God is still speaking was so profound, for my little, 24, 25-year-old self. And it was like, oh, okay, here he is. So thank you for that, because that is an important thing to remember, that sometimes you say this to somebody else and they say, well, didn't you get it? It's like, oh no, that's what that means. That's where he is. So even sometimes you could do this if you're by yourself. That's why the night reflection on the day is so important, because sometimes you could write it down. And when you write it down and you see it, you say, oh my God, that was God. That was God speaking to me. That was God touching me today. All right. So reflection is a really important part of growing in the spiritual life. If we don't reflect, we don't even know that we're growing. Okay. Any questions, thoughts, ideas, any other insights? Okay.
Father Daly, one
Yeah.
quick question.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on mystical experiences that people claim that they have experienced?
I think they actually happen, but I think that there are some people who think they're supposed to have mystical experiences, and therefore you never get a really clear story. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's kind of like, say we went to a church where people, rested in the spirit and they fell out on the floor. Well, there are some who actually has that experience, but then there are others who say, hey, wait a second. If I belong to this church, I better fall out, or speaking tongues, or
speaking tongues or something.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, and so people pretend, and it's hard to tell the difference between the pretender and the real person then. And then, and maybe this should be the way to tell the difference. And then the only real sign, and Paul says this in Corinthians, right? The only real sign is, how do you love? You can speak in tongues all you want, but if you're not kind to your neighbor, I don't care what you're saying. And Paul even says this, it's in Corinthians also. Paul says something interesting. He says, if we can't interpret what you're saying, what good is it for the community? When you're praying like that, pray at home.
Okay.
Don't pray like that in community. Because if somebody can't figure it out, they used to call this, I belonged to when I was in high school, a charismatic prayer group, and people would speak in tongues, but then somebody would interpret it, and they called that prophecy, and they would say whatever they said. Then that makes sense, because Paul is so clear on it. So you come to church, you're speaking in some strange language nobody understands, and you want us to clap for you? What do you want us to do?
Right. All
right.
Yeah.
All right. It has to mean something to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, don't do that in church. He says, go home and do that. And then he uses this other line. You might all remember this. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. He's talking about speaking in tongues. But when I was an adult, I took on adult ways. So let me show you. And that's the introduction line from chapter 12 to chapter 13. In chapter 13, he says, love is patient, love is kind, love is never jealous. All right. Because ultimately, as an adult Christian, we are called to love. We're not called to perform. We're not called to have people pat us on the back and say, wow, they know how to fall out and on the floor in the spirit, and they can speak strange tongues that nobody can figure out. Paul says, who cares? If you don't love, what good is it? And then he goes on to say, remember, you could give all your money away, give everything away, but if you're not loving, It doesn't mean a thing.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
So it's not about the performances. It is about actual love.
Action. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. They listened. This is verse 22. They listened to him until he said this, but then they raised their voices and shouted, "Take such a one as this away from the earth. It is not right that he should live." All right. They're a little upset with him. All right. And as they were yelling and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust into the air, the cohort commander ordered him to be brought into the compound and gave instructions that he be interrogated under the lash to determine the reason why they were making such an outcry against him. All right. So it's one of the first times that we're going to see already that Paul was arrested. All right. He was arrested so many times. But when they had stretched him out for the whips, Paul said to the centurion on duty, "Is it lawful for you to scourge a man who is a Roman citizen and has not been tried?" All right, so what did we learn? That Paul is a Roman citizen, okay? So not every Jew became a Roman citizen, obviously. So let's see what happens next. When the centurion heard this, he went to the cohort commander and reported it, saying, "What are you going to do? This man is a Roman citizen." Then the commander came and said to him, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes," he answered. The commander replied, "I acquired this citizenship for a large sum of money." Paul said, "But I was born one." All right, so Paul's parents were Roman citizens. At once, those who were going to interrogate him backed away from him, and the commander became alarmed when he realized that he was a Roman citizen and that he had him bound. All right, so without being tried, he was bound and he was going to be whipped. But he's a Roman citizen, so none of that could happen. Does anybody know? I'm going to not say it. How did Paul get killed? At the end, how was he murdered by the Romans?
Was he stoned? I don't remember.
No, stoned. No. Don't be looking it up on your phones now. I can't see you.
No AI.
No AI.
Was he shipwrecked?
Nope.
I don't know. Was Paul hung?
Nope.
I'm guessing no.
Now I'm going to say
Couldn't have been poisoned.
No, he wasn't poisoned. I'm going to say something that sounds bizarre, but what would be the in those days? What would be the humane way to kill somebody in capital punishment? Today they think it's lethal injection, but anyway, in those days, the Romans.
Beheading?
Yeah,
Cat
beheading.
09.
No, beheading.
Or beheaded. Oh.
Yeah.
Beheaded,
all right.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking. When I said, was he hung?
Oh, well, I was thinking of being hung, by
No. I think his head was taken off.
Yeah, his head was taken off. So he was killed in Rome, we know. But again, we don't know exactly the place. There is a place that they say was the place, and it's called Tre Fontane, meaning the three fountains, because they said when his head fell off, it bounced 3 times, and from there, water sprout up. A little bit of an extra story. All right, so I don't know that any of that is true, but we do know that Paul was killed around the year 62 in Rome. It was the same year that Peter was killed and the same year that James was killed. And all 3 of them were killed in Rome. All right, so there was a very big massacre of Christians. So even when the Roman Catholics say their big church in Rome, the Vatican, or what the church is called, St. Peter's, in Rome, is built on the cemetery or the grave where Peter was buried, it's kind of doubtful. And it's doubtful for this one reason. They would have all been thrown into mass graves. All right. So sadly, like the Nazis did, so did the Romans do. When they killed a whole bunch of people, they didn't say, now, who is this? Let's assign them a particular grade. They just threw dead bodies into big pits. But the three of those men who are kind of the foundation of the Christian church were thrown into pits. And
we weren't taught that, Father.
No.
I don't think.
I am sure. All right. So they kind of try to make this.
Father, now listen. These folks have you believing that their bodies are under the Vatican, the floor of the Vatican. Oh,
I know.
Lord help us.
Yeah, and so yeah. But anyway. But of course we also have that story from around the 4th century with Saint Helena, who's the mother of Constantine, right? And she goes there, right? Jesus is killed somewhere between the year 30 and 33. She goes around the year 400 and she discovers the real cross of Christ, right? So that's what she brought back to Rome, the real cross. And of course, that would be absurd, bizarre, right? Because thousands of crosses existed and thousands of Jews and slaves were killed on crosses, right? So you can't really pick out any one and say, oh, this is the one that Jesus died on. Yeah, we have no clue. All right. But it's nice for stories and it's nice for this, I think. Not that the Roman Catholics haven't done other crazy things with it, but it's nice because you can't, even though Catholics have, you can't make an idol of it, right? There's this church here in Canarsie, St. Jude's, and I remember when they built it and all, and they said, oh, and they have a piece of the real cross. Yes, I know. Yeah, it's still around, right? We got a splinter from the real cross. Well, we don't. Nobody does. All right. And the beauty of that is that we can't make an idol of it. All right. That's the important part of this. God wants us to live in spirit and truth, as we heard Jesus say last week to the woman at the well. You can't rely on things like real cross, splinter, or I don't know, knowing exactly what tomb Jesus rose from, or knowing that Jesus grew up in this particular house, was born in this particular place in Bethlehem. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Was he from that area? Absolutely. But that area is like this area because Christ is everywhere. There's no one place where Christ comes from. And the beauty that we see in Christianity is if you grew up in Asia, your Jesus looks Asian, right? Your Mary looks Asian. Your Joseph looks Asian, right? So it's really important that we incarnate our understanding of the Christ from the places from which we came, right? And that's why Jesus should have a black hue, right? He surely was a man from that part of the world, Palestine, so he surely was brown, at least, and everybody else was. Go ahead, Miss Curtis.
But do we really sit and realize how much money these people are making on all these pilgrimages and all of that?
Oh, yeah.
And we have all these people starving, living without a home and all sorts of stuff.
Absolute craziness.
It does make you mad.
Yep.
From time to time when you think about how we were duped. And it continues.
Yes.
It has not stopped.
No. See, that's why idolatry is all about that. It's about the self. It's not about God. That's why there's so many rules in Judaism about idolatry. And Christianity has those same rules, except.
Yeah, but so that was the means by which you'd actually gain converts, right? To actually have God look like you.
Yeah, exactly.
I used to live in in Flushing off Main Street, Queens, years
Yeah.
ago, and so there was a a South Korean Christian church right behind my building. And when you drove by there, you see the image of Christ, looking like Buddha.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, he looked Asian, as you said. But I've seen it,
Yep.
and so and in fact, the church is still there. So, I also, when I was in California, I went past a mural of Dr. Martin Luther King,
Mhm.
and he looked like a Zapatista. He looked like a Mexican dude,
Yes, of
you
course.
know. And that was how the artist saw Martin Luther King,
Exactly.
like himself.
See, it's incarnational. Once
It's
we
not,
make
yeah,
it one thing, once we make Jesus, blue-eyed and blonde-haired,
yeah,
we lose him, right?
yeah. But I think that they did again. It's simply a way of gaining converts. And I
Yep.
actually I read somewhere. This is something that I actually read, that when Christianity first went to Northern Europe, to the Scandinavians,
Mhm.
they they use things, they use the Scandinavian gods in different forms to actually to gain converts. Like
Absolutely.
Thor,
Yep.
for example, the god of thunder is Thursday, and so on and so forth. And so they build churches on the same holy land, land and relics where where the Norse gods used to be worshipped. And they build
Absolutely.
churches.
Yeah. There's a famous church in Rome.
Mhm.
It's in Rome. So I was the pastor of a church in South Ozone Park called St. Clement the Pope. Okay. And he was Bishop of Rome, probably around the 2nd century or so. But what was interesting was that the church named for him in Rome was built on top of a temple to fire, which was
Okay.
built on top of a temple to water.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, what a fascinating thing, because there in that one space that now there's a Christian temple, there was already baptism and confirmation. It was already there. The symbols
Yeah.
were already there.
Oh,
The
yeah.
God who we believe is spirit was already preparing people to understand Christ, So, see, and that's why it's important to respect other traditions, because God is speaking through them, and sometimes even speaks through them to get us Christians to understand something.
Yes.
I
Well, to
remember
understand them,
retreat on that.
and not condemn
Right.
them to be heathens.
Right.
Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
Yeah. Or pagans, and we say
Or
such
pagans.
horrible things about people who we don't understand.
Yeah.
And all religion is a matter of language. Everybody who's on here, we have the Christian language, but I don't have the language for, I don't know, Hinduism or Buddhism. I know some things, but I don't have their language. It's not how my brain works. I immediately connect to the symbols of Christianity. I once was at a Buddhist tea ceremony. Well, it was nice. It's not that it was not nice. It didn't speak to my inner self like sharing in communion does. It was nice, but this is something different that is part of my symbol system, part of the mythology that works for me, the way that God speaks to my heart. So I think those things are really important, and to see that, but that doesn't mean that the tea ceremony is not sacred. It is very sacred, and I was a good sacred person in that space, right?
Yeah.
just as when I've gone to a synagogue, and at the end of their synagogue service, they invite you to share in a communion,
Yes.
right? And welcomed me to share in, the challah bread and a glass of wine, all right, which is obviously where we take our Eucharist from. And that's how their service ends. Yeah, that was wonderful, but it didn't speak to me like when we break bread and share our cup. It's different, but just sacred, especially for the people who understand it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Verse 30.
Father.
Oh, go ahead, Miss Curtis.
I think most people online know the difference in the crosses in church.
Mm-hmm.
The Christ cross I'm talking about now, not the bearer that the bearer lost on.
Mm-hmm.
A lady said to me the other day, when you guys are going to clean this, the cross. So I asked her, which one? She says, don't get technical with me, Miss Curtis. I said, I'm not getting technical. I want to know which cross you want me to clean. Is it the bearer cross or the Christ cross? Which one? She walked right up and she pointed at the Christ cross, on which I went totally quiet. And she says, it's dirty. I says, I don't think so, or else I would have cleaned it. She says, oh, I understand now, Miss Curtis. And she walked back and she just sat there. And I said to her, I think both of us need to concentrate on the color of our skins right now, okay? Very calmly. And she says, I don't know, Miss Curtis. she was in shock mode.
Yeah.
Because I don't think most people are observing what's going on in our church.
Yeah.
But we're ready, willing, and able to complain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what people do. That's just what people
That's
do.
fashionable.
Yeah. So verse 30 starts with, the next day, wishing to determine the truth about why he was being accused by the Jews, he freed him and ordered the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin to convene. Then he brought Paul down and made him stand before them. Okay. And so it kind of here ends the part about much more about Paul in the next chapter. But here ends the whole idea of his conversion. So what happens after Paul is converted? Well, he goes to Jerusalem. He prays there. He, probably has a couple of workshops, but Jews by and large did not appreciate this. They didn't appreciate a Pharisee gone wild, right? They didn't appreciate the fact that this Pharisee was now a full-fledged member of the Christian community. They didn't appreciate the fact that this Pharisee had some clout. He was a Roman citizen. And so basically he's going to disappear from the scene, okay? And we're going to hear more about this, of course, when we get to Paul's letters themselves, because he goes into detail about it. And the third place is really going to be chapter 26 of Acts, where again we meet Paul and he talks about his conversion experience. All right. So the conversion experience is central. It's just as it's central for us. What touched us at one point in our life about God or about Christ is still central to us. It's what brought us to God. I am not sure, but this thought just came into my head as I'm thinking it. I don't know that I've ever thought this out clear enough until this very second. I'm thinking the thing that spoke to me most, that called me to conversion, that kind of excites my heart then and now, is really participating in communion. Not only sharing in communion, but being there, to be in a community. And because if I think of the religious experiences I had as a kid, right, because that's what I'm thinking back, I remember some of the songs we sang, way back. I remember when we turned the altar around, and the priest was no longer facing, the back of the priest was no longer facing us. I remember, I remember going up for communion, of course. And every single time, whether it was in Sunday school classes or in church, that somebody spoke about communion. Like, for instance, I remember as a kid, I did this as a kid. Remember that in the 60s was the time of banners and all. I made a banner of John chapter 6, where Jesus says, "I am the bread of life." And I remember that banner and making, because those words spoke to me. I was a kid, 9, 10, 11. So yeah, if I wanted to say what brought me to God was probably the experience of Eucharist. And if I say what brought me ultimately to the Episcopal Church, would be your celebration of communion that you celebrated. I didn't join the United Church of Christ. I didn't join the Presbyterians or the Methodists because they didn't share the Eucharist as often. You all share it every Sunday, and in our place, Wednesdays as well. So for me, that is probably the moment. So after Bible study today, I'm going to have to go write this in my journal. I never put it together until I was just talking now about Paul and his primary experience, but those were primary experiences, for me. And it also goes with another thing. It goes back to the Maundy Thursday ritual, when I was a kid. How after the altar was stripped and the church was now in dark, the Eucharist that was left over was put in another tabernacle and placed on a very high altar. I remember that in the side of the church. And I remember sitting there in the dark, and I am no more than 10 or 11 years old. And I nobody brought me to church. I brought myself to church at that point. And just sitting there still in the dark with the spotlight on that tabernacle, and how that spoke to me and really still speaks to me. That there's somehow a presence because we gathered, because we prayed over bread and wine, that somehow this bread and wine that nourishes us reminds us Christ is risen, right? So it surely is in the breaking of the bread that we witness the Christ, right? So, yeah, so I would say that those Eucharistic symbols were probably the symbols that God used to speak to my heart.
Father Deal, at what age did you know that you wanted to become a priest? Or
I was 11.
Wow.
I was 11. I was 11, and it was at my confirmation. And at the confirmation, the bishop, Boardman was his name, said, "And how many of you little boys and little girls want to become priests? And little girls, how many of you want to be sisters?" And I raised my hand. I was not a kid who really liked going to church to begin with, and my parents didn't go to church, but they put me in the classes and all those things. And I raised my hand. I never, ever before that second thought anything about priests. I didn't know them. I knew the sisters more because they were the Sunday school teachers, but I didn't know the priests. And so I remember, the family had a little gathering afterwards, and I remember them saying, and this was, funny, they were saying, "Oh, wasn't it cute when the bishop asked how many of you little boys want to be priests and how many girls want to become sisters?" And I said to them, I raised my hand, and all that could be heard were the crickets. And everybody looked at me. They were as shocked as I was shocked. But I remember from that day, this passion passion, desire, this wanting more than air to pray.
And it's amazing that passion remains.
Yeah.
When you speak, you feel it, you hear it from you.
So that's kind of it, and that desire to pray. And I created a prayer life for myself. I started reading the Bible. I went to public school, and so before I went to school every day, I went to mass. And it was this great desire. And my poor family didn't know what the heck I was doing, and whatever. But this was this passion, this crazy passion. That for me, I could say it hasn't stopped. Like, prayer is the most essential thing in my life. And as I said on one of our things just the other day, for us, it's a matter of life and death. And I really believe that. The most important thing I could do every day is pray. Right. So I think that's the kind of thing that all comes from being 11 years old, and whatever I think it was May 7th, I received confirmation. And from that day on, I've been crazy like that.
That's good crazy.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. All right. So, so maybe if everybody could do this, if you could do for a homework assignment, could you figure out the moment that you knew you wanted to be in a relationship with God? I think of it as our burning bush moment, right? And if you wanted next week to share about that would be wonderful. But I mean, it is personal, so you don't have to share it, obviously. But yeah, think of your burning bush moment, and for probably most of us, it's not going to be when you're 11 or 5 or something. For most of us, it's going to be a little older and much more nuanced, and that's that's what God does. So I just wrote myself a note: bush moment. If anybody wants to share that next week, that would be great. Because
there's a bush called the burning bush, right?
No, I don't.
Yes, it becomes a bright pink or red just around the fall.
Oh wow! Okay.
It's called the burning bush. Yes.
The burning bush.
Yes,
okay.
there is.
Oh, wow.
There is.
Right. So the burning bush, and it'd be nice to know where it grows.
It's very popular in New Jersey.
Oh my God! So it's not.
I'll take a picture and send it to you one day.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'd like to grow one. That would be wonderful. So, all right. So everyone have a great afternoon, and see if we could connect during the week at something. All right. Thank you all.
You have a wonderful afternoon to everybody.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a
Thank you,
wonderful
Father.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.